London, 1812, where the ton gathered beneath chandeliers to witness scandal disguised as dance and virtue disguised as embroidery. An event most unexpected occurred. A maid, no less, saved a kingdom, though she feared her heart more imperiled than any crown. Let us begin, dearest listeners, not in a ballroom, though we shall arrive there presently, but in the shadowed corridors of Carlton House, where secrets are whispered louder than state matters, and where our heroine, Miss Elowen Northcott, found herself perilously close to treason, or so it might have been had not her quick ears and quicker wit intercepted a letter meant for foreign hands. Now, before you clutch your pearls, permit this author to assure you that Elowen was no common maid. Indeed, her lineage was as mysterious as her eyes were gray, and while she answered to the Countess of Haversley as lady's companion, her posture betrayed finishing school, and her French was far too fluent for a girl raised among scullery pots. But as we all know, the ton adores a tidy story as long as it fits into a calling card, and Elowen's was not. It was on a rainy Thursday that she stumbled quite literally upon the very missive that would alter the fate of England. A misplaced portfolio, for what nobleman carries it himself, had been left in the blue salon, a room where Elowen had been sent to retrieve the Countess's gloves. The letter inside, half opened, bore the seal of a certain foreign ambassador known for his fondness for port and treachery. Curious, Elowen had murmured, fingers trembling as she read the contents aloud beneath her breath. Troop movements? In Kent. She was still reading when the door swung open, admitting not a footman, but a man who looked as if he had stepped from a Greek coin, tall, broad-shouldered, and with the kind of face that rendered even dowagers momentarily speechless. His name was Mr. Dorian Fairfax, and he had the unfortunate distinction of being both the Duke of Ashworth's nephew and the Home Secretary's favorite spy, though one title was far easier to mention over tea. "You ought not to be reading that," he said, voice cool as a Highland loch. "I ought not to be many things," Elowen replied, not dropping the letter. "But here we are." Thus began a partnership that would unnerve the cabinet and delight the gossips, for after the letter was delivered personally, by Elowen and Mr. Fairfax, to a very red-faced Lord Liverpool, the plot was foiled, the ambassador discreetly recalled, and England, as it were, remained uninvaded. But let us not dwell on politics, how tedious. Instead, fast forward with me a fortnight to Lady Dunscombe's grand ball, where the chandeliers dripped with diamonds, and so did the matrons. There, Elowen, now suddenly a guest, an elevation that sent several tight-laced mammas into a faint, stood at the edge of the dance floor in a gown borrowed from the Countess herself. "She cannot be any better than a governess," Lady Pelham hissed behind her fan. "And I heard she was born in Maine." "My dear," her companion whispered back, "that's in America. Precisely the sort of scandal that makes a ball worth attending." Mr. Fairfax, meanwhile, had not yet arrived. And if Elowen's gaze returned to the doorway more than propriety allowed, well, who among us has not waited for a man with a secret smile and a dangerous occupation? When he did appear, it was with no small commotion. He did not bow to the hostess, Scandal, nor did he seek out his uncle, Double Scandal, but strode directly to Elowen, all eyes following that dark coat and those darker eyes. "Miss Northcott," he said, offering his hand, "would you grant me this dance? The waltz, of course, the most intimate of dances, the one most likely to ignite gossip and hearts." Elowen hesitated. "You presume I am permitted." "I presume nothing," he replied, eyes gleaming. "I only hope." Oh, dearest readers, they danced. And if the room noticed how long his hand lingered at her waist, or how she turned her face too close to his cheek, they said nothing aloud. But silence in a ballroom is merely gossip waiting to be born. Later, on the terrace, when the violins were drowned by the night wind and Elowen dared to speak of the world beyond the ballroom, Mr. Fairfax leaned close and said, "You may have saved the kingdom, but I fear for your heart. And I fear you've already captured it," she whispered, before realizing what she had confessed. He did not laugh. "Then we are both in peril. But, dear listeners, nothing so delicious may proceed unopposed." The very next morning, the Times reported that Miss Northcott, a lady of uncertain origins, had been seen in close conversation with Mr. Fairfax, whose uncle is known to favor matches of noble blood. The ton, of course, erupted. Suitors vanished. Invitations dwindled. The Countess of Haversley, though fond of Elowen, suggested a visit to Bath where undesirable attachments might cool as swiftly as the waters. And what of Mr. Fairfax, you ask? His letters went unanswered, his visits rebuffed. For Elowen, convinced that love was not enough to counter society's disdain, chose silence over scandal. But before you despair, let me remind you this is a tale of declarations, not defeats. For what is a maid to do, when she has saved a kingdom, but fears she cannot save her heart from a court that will never deem her worthy? Ah, but hearts, like nations, are not always ruled by laws. Sometimes they are ruled by love. Dearest listeners, if you have ever been exiled to Bath by a well-meaning aristocrat determined to cool your affections, you will know precisely how many tepid teas and tepid tempers await there. Our Elowen, much to the regret of Bath's more observant matrons, arrived with little luggage but plenty of quiet scandal, which naturally preceded her by a full 3 days. She was installed, quite properly, in a modest suite at the Crescent with the Countess's cousin, Lady Archmere, a woman whose conversation bore the unfortunate quality of drying the air. Lady Archmere believed firmly in the healing power of walks, tepid milk, and an absence of men. Elowen, who had never much believed in any of those, spent her mornings with a book and her afternoons in reluctant promenade, where she was invariably trailed by a widow with a lorgnette and a poodle named Titus. Such a pity, came the whisper behind a hedge one morning, to be so pretty and yet so thoroughly unsuitable. Elowen did not turn. She had learned by now that scandal never approached directly. It preferred to sidle up behind one's back, wearing perfume. She might have endured the entire season, thus half-watched, half-pitted had not a carriage arrived outside Lady Archmere's on a Tuesday, just after the rain. It was not the arrival itself that caused the stir. Bath, after all, boasts more carriages than convictions. No, what drew every curtain twitch and startled every lapdog was the identity of the man who stepped from it. Mr. Dorian Fairfax, dressed not in espionage's usual anonymity, but in a coat so perfectly cut it might have silenced Parliament. He carried no flowers. Instead, he bore a document case under his arm and a look that suggested he had no intention of discussing the weather. "Good God," Lady Archmere muttered, peering from the parlor. "Is that the Fairfax boy? I thought him quite lost to the Foreign Office." "He has found his way to Bath," Elowen replied, rising far too quickly from her seat. "He was shown in." Of course he was. Even Lady Archmere, who distrusted passion almost as much as she distrusted Catholics, could not deny the man entry. And so it was that Elowen found herself alone in the drawing-room with the one person she had spent 3 weeks trying not to think about. "You look very well," he said, standing with hands clasped behind his back as if he feared touching anything in the room might cause it to combust. "I imagine I look very quiet," she replied. "That seems to be the desired effect." His gaze did not waver. "I brought something. From the Home Secretary. I do hope it's not another letter," she said, taking the envelope despite herself. "The last one nearly got me hanged. This one is safer. It's an offer." Elowen opened it carefully. The script was formal, the seal unbroken. She read only the first line before folding it again. "They want me to join the office." "You're already in it," he said, voice low. "You just haven't been paid." "Is this meant to be a reward?" she asked. "Or a way to make me disappear more conveniently?" His jaw tightened, and for the first time since entering, he moved closer. "It's a way to make you safe. Useful. Respected." "I was useful the moment I read that letter," she said. "But I was only respectable until I danced with you." He exhaled sharply through his nose. "Do you truly believe I came here to offer you employment?" She looked away. "You came because I didn't answer your letters. And because your uncle would rather see you married to Lady Honoria Settlebridge." He did not laugh. "She once asked me if Wales was part of Scotland. I hear they're often confused." "Elowen." She looked up then, and there it was the expression she had tried to forget. That fierce, searching gaze that made her feel not examined, but seen. "I have no title to offer you," she said, voice quiet. "No fortune, no lineage. The Ton will never accept me." "I do not require their permission," he said. "You do not," she agreed. "But your family expects it. And you. I expect only that when I ask you to marry me, you won't treat it like a diplomatic threat." Her breath caught, a sound so small it seemed to disappear into the hush of the room. He stepped closer, the document case forgotten on a chair. I love you, he said plainly. Not because you saved a letter. Not because you intrigue the office. Not even because you make the world bearable in ways it wasn't before. I love you because you see every door that's closed and still walk forward. I don't walk, she said, blinking hard. I'm usually pushed. Then let me be the one to catch you. Outside, the rain began again, as if the sky itself had decided to offer applause. Lady Archmere, who had been eavesdropping from the hall with the subtlety of a steam engine, dropped her teacup. And in that small drawing room, where no one wore diamonds and no orchestra played, Mr. Dorian Fairfax went to one knee not as a spy, nor a nobleman, but as a man who had chosen love over title. Will you marry me? He asked. Elowen, who had saved a kingdom but feared she could not claim a heart, finally reached for his hand. Yes, she said, before your uncle finds out. And thus, dear readers, the first thread in our tale is tied. But this author knows the ton far too well to believe they will accept such happiness without protest. After all, when love so thoroughly triumphs, envy is never far behind. The engagement of Mr. Dorian Fairfax to Miss Elowen Northcott was not so much announced as detonated. Within 3 days of his proposal, the matter had sailed through the drawing rooms of Bath, galloped to London with a flurry of letters, and arrived at the doorstep of the Duke of Ashworth with all the subtlety of a cavalry charge. Now, dear readers, you may recall that the Duke was not a man given to displays of sentiment. His affections were generally reserved for his hunting dogs and the latest parliamentary scandal. So when word reached his study that his heir presumptive intended to marry a woman whose past was stitched together with more mystery than muslin, the effect was immediate and not altogether quiet. I suppose I must receive her, he announced, with all the enthusiasm of a man agreeing to host smallpox. Thus was Elowen summoned to London, not by invitation, but by expectation, a far colder summons, and one with far more embroidery required. The Countess, always practical in matters of appearances, sent her off with a new pelisse and a warning. Whatever you do, do not mention the letter. Or France. Or the Home Secretary. Good heavens, don't mention anything at all. Elowen arrived at Berkeley Square in a carriage borrowed from Lady Archmere, which was perhaps the most charitable thing the woman had ever done. She wore a gown of deep violet, chosen not for fashion but for its sobering effect, an ensemble that suggested she might be capable of complex arithmetic or at least of walking across a room without fainting. The Duke received her in the library, a room whose books had not been read since the last century, but which gave the reassuring impression that someone in the house might be capable of Latin. You are, he began, without rising, the daughter of. I was raised in Cornwall, Elowen replied, stepping forward with a composure that startled even herself. My parentage is uncertain, though I suspect it would not impress you even if it were known. The Duke looked up from his brandy. Well, that saves time. Dorian, who stood by the hearth with the mien of a man ready to intercept flying decanters, said nothing. Elowen did not look at him. You'll be marrying into a name older than most cathedrals, the Duke said. It would be convenient if you had no opinions. I have a few, Elowen replied, but none I intend to share over brandy. This, dear readers, elicited the first flicker of something dangerously close to amusement in the Duke's expression. You're not what I expected, he said. So I've been told. Very well, the Duke said, rising with the air of a man who had once wrestled a bear and found it less troublesome than dinner guests. If you do anything to embarrass this family, I shall be forced to disown Dorian and take up gardening. I understand, Elowen said, though you may find roses more forgiving. With that, the matter was considered closed. The Duke, having satisfied himself that Elowen would not set fire to the house or quote poetry at supper, declared the engagement regrettable but tolerable, which in noble parlance is tantamount to a blessing. That evening, at a rather more intimate supper than usual, as the Dowager Marchioness of Halberton had made a sudden excuse involving her knees, Elowen sat beside Dorian beneath a chandelier older than most nations. The table was set with silver so heavy it could double as weaponry, and the footmen wore expressions of such solemnity one might have thought they were preparing for war. I didn't ask you earlier, Dorian said quietly, offering her a slice of pheasant. But did you accept for me or despite everything else? She kept her gaze level. I accepted because you were the first man who looked at me and did not see only the mystery. You saw the merit. That, he said, is because you have more of it than anyone I know. She smiled, but only faintly. The room still pressed too heavily around her, the weight of centuries settling on her shoulders like ermine. They will never forget that I was once a companion. They will never forget, Dorian said, that you turned down the Home Secretary's personal offer just to marry a man with a very cross uncle. Temporarily cross, came the Duke's voice from the head of the table. And only when I'm sober. That, dear readers, was as close to affection as the Ashworth family ever came. And it was enough. The wedding was set for a fortnight hence, to take place at St. George's, Hanover Square, and the ton predictably split into two camps. Those who insisted Elowen must be the illegitimate daughter of someone quite grand, and those who insisted she must be the illegitimate daughter of someone quite French. Lady Pelham lobbied for both. But no matter what was whispered in drawing rooms or printed in the more daring pamphlets, Elowen remained unmoved. She had stood before the Foreign Office and the Duke of Ashworth. She had danced at Lady Dunscombe's and survived Bath. She had faced down scandal, silence, and society. All that remained now, dearest readers, was to marry the man she loved and let the world choke on its own astonishment. And oh, how it would. Dearest listeners, the wedding of Miss Elowen Northcott to Mr. Dorian Fairfax was not, as the ton had hoped, derailed by divine intervention, a sudden duel, or a long-lost Italian wife emerging from the shrubbery. Instead, it proceeded precisely as planned, an outcome which, to some, was the greatest scandal of all. St. George's, Hanover Square, was filled to the edges with a congregation that included 3 bishops, 2 ex-lovers, 1 baronet with a gouty limp, and Lady Pelham, who arrived wearing mourning black in protest. The organ thundered. The florists exceeded their brief. And somewhere between the arrival of the bride and the first whispered wager on whether she would faint, the entire assembly remembered how to breathe. Elowen did not faint. She walked the aisle with the Countess of Haversley on her arm, a substitution that caused the dowagers to blink twice and the younger ladies to re-evaluate their own companions. The Countess wore a sapphire brooch large enough to bankrupt a minor duchy, and dared anyone to question her escorting a woman's society had once considered her employee. "She's not nobly born," whispered the Honorable Miss Priscilla Vane to her cousin. "No," came the reply, "but she's nobly walked." At the altar, Dorian waited, not in the uniform of his office, but a coat of midnight blue with a single white rose at his lapel in understated rebellion, given the Fairfax family's traditional preference for ivory cravats and overbearing waistcoats. His expression, dear readers, was not the brooding sort that poets adore, but something quieter, steadier. The look of a man who had spent his life racing toward shadows and had finally found the one person who turned them to light. After the ceremony, the newly married couple were whisked away in a carriage so polished it blinded the footmen. They did not speak much on the ride to the Fairfax townhouse, though Elowen did observe, "I think Lady Pelham attempted to curse me with her fan." "She would need Latin," Dorian replied, "and she can barely manage a menu." It was not until the door to his family's London home had closed behind them, sealing out the cheers, the speculation, the ever-present scrutiny, that Elowen allowed herself to release the breath she had been holding since the Archbishop began to drone. "Do you suppose," she said, unwinding her gloves with care, "they'll spend the entire week guessing who my father was?" "They'll spend the decade," he replied, "and still get it wrong." "I rather hope they do," she said. "The truth is far too dull." Dorian crossed the room and took her hand, not with the urgency of a man claiming a prize, but with the reverence of one acknowledging a pact. "Whatever they say, it will never matter more than what we know." Elowen studied his face. "And what is that?" "That you are mine," he said. "And I am yours. No matter who you were. No matter who I might become." He smiled, not the kind that performs, but the kind that reveals. "Especially then." Now, readers, do not assume all was quiet in the days that followed. For though the couple had wed, and wed well, society is not easily silenced. The Fairfax drawing-room became a revolving door of veiled curiosity. Lady Tichborne arrived with a basket of oranges and a question about Elowen's accent. Lord Calverley brought a hound that growled when Elowen touched the tea service. The Dowager Marchioness of Holberton, having recovered from her knees, called to inspect the bride, and left muttering about her diction being entirely too clean for Cornwall. Elowen bore it all with the poise of a woman who had once stopped a foreign plot with a misplaced letter. She answered politely, nodded when required, and accepted compliments with the precise amount of gratitude that implied she knew they were half insults in disguise. It was only in the evenings, when the lamps were lowered and the house grew still, that she let her posture soften. One such evening, she stood at the window, watching the gaslights flicker across the square. Dorian joined her, placing a hand lightly at her back. "I received word from the office," he said. "They want you to consider a position in Brussels." She did not turn. "As what?" "Liaison. Code work. A desk, not a dagger." She was quiet a moment. "They still think I'm best used in silence. They think you're best not wasted." When she finally looked at him, her eyes were clear. "Would it change anything between us?" "It would change everything," he said. "I'd have to follow you." She laughed, not bitterly, but brightly. "You'd make an abominable desk clerk. Then I would simply become a very attentive husband." And there it was again, not the proposal, not the promise, but the truth beneath both. That love, once freely given, asks nothing but belief. They did not go to Brussels. Instead, they remained in London for the remainder of the season, a decision that caused Lady Pelham to faint theatrically at Almack's twice, and the Morning Courier to run a column titled, "The Most Mysterious Mrs. Fairfax." Elowen never corrected them. Let them guess, she reasoned. Let them invent. All that mattered was this. In a world ruled by lineage, she had chosen a man who cared only for legacy, the kind built between two hands, not two houses. And in doing so, she had not only saved a kingdom, but secured a life the Ton could neither bless nor ruin. And, dearest listeners, though the dances continued, and the whispers never ceased, no one dared to doubt the devotion between a woman unknown and a man unshaken. They had, after all, already outwitted war. What was society compared to that?